Well, I've been asked to talk about the topic of a book that I've just released on the early roots of American popular music. The book looks at the interaction between African American people and Anglo Celtic people, immigrant groups, in the USA between the American Revolution and the Civil War. And it tries to get at the roots of the interaction between those groups of people, especially working class people, in the street musics of the early Republic. And those street musics and dance are things that later became kind of legitimized on the stage, and they really become the roots of American popular music. And they lead to things like vaudeville and ragtime and early jazz and early country music. Well, I think that these art forms are still very engaging. The music, these are songs, some of these pieces are songs that are 150 or 180 years old, and yet they're still songs that you hear on the ice cream trucks here in town. Some of those tunes that the ice cream trucks play come right out of this tradition. And so even if it's not a particular time period that might be familiar to folks, it is an early example of a kind of interaction that's really at the heart of American popular culture, because we're basically an immigrant nation. Almost everybody who came here from someplace else, as much as 12,000 years ago, but nevertheless, there are people who came here from elsewhere. And in the 19th century, in the 1800s, there was an enormous amount of immigration, many different cultural groups coming from different places. African Americans being freed from slavery in the North and remaining in slavery in the South, people traveling between the Caribbean and the southern U.S., exchange happening on ships' decks and on riverboats and on the canals of the Republic. And that kind of interaction between different ethnic groups, sometimes competition for jobs, and sometimes exchange of music and dance and words and religious beliefs, is really at the heart of modern multicultural America. You know, we think of our population as kind of a patchwork quilt of people of very different experiences, recent immigrants, people who've been here a long time, the descendants of immigrants, people who get along with each other and people who don't get along with each other for all kinds of reasons. But one of the things that has always united us is the remarkable vitality of our popular culture, the music that we make and the dances that we do. And for a very long time, for 200 years at least, that music and dance that arises out of the interaction between people is something that's gone around the world. And American popular music is at the root of much of the popular music of the entire globe. And so, although we're still really trying to work out how you be a multicultural nation, how you make that a positive democracy, even though we're still trying to work that out, our music has kind of shown us one possible route, one possible way that maybe we could be the nation that we aspire to be. I should say this is basically a work of history. It's published by a scholarly press, and it looks at a particular period in our popular cultural history. But what it identifies is a kind of historical pattern that repeats and repeats and repeats. I look at a very early example of it in the 1810s and 1820s, but it's a kind of cultural exchange. I call it a Creole synthesis, a Creole exchange. It's a kind of exchange that's happened repeatedly in American popular culture. You know, this music that I talk about, this minstrelsy, blackface minstrelsy, it was a street music first, that people made in the street, that people exchanged in the street. People came from all over the place and diverse experiences, and they kind of worked things out. And African dance met Irish fiddle tunes, and Irish hard shoe dancing met African and Appalachian flat footing, and this new music results. And then there's a moment when it goes from being a street music to being a music that's presented on the stage. And at that moment, there's this great expanded sense of possibilities, and people say, wow, that's our music that we know from the street, and there it is on the stage, and it's this thing that's ours, that's been legitimized. And you know, that's the same kind of thing that happened with early jazz in the 1920s. It was a street music and a barroom music, and then it gets heard on the concert stage, and then it gets heard on records. And the same thing happened with hip-hop in the 1970s and 1980s. I mean, I remember when I was living in New York in the late 70s, hip-hop was the kind of thing you heard on the basketball courts. But then in the late 70s and early 80s, a few radio stations started playing it, and then hip hop videos finally made their way to MTV, and it became very popular very quickly. And it wasn't popular because no one had ever seen it before. It was popular because people who knew it from the street said, wow, that's our stuff, and now it's on MTV, and we're getting somewhere as a people. And so that kind of exchange, and sometimes it's been very constructive and positive, and sometimes it's been really competitive. That kind of exchange, that cycle, is something that's happened again and again in American culture. And so, although my book is a history, I think it points to characteristics of American popular culture, music and dance, that have been remarkably vital and continue to be vital, and new things continue to happen, and new things continue to come out of that encounter between diverse people. This is my first year involved with the open teaching concept. I was invited by Joby Martinez to become involved. I teach across the curriculum. My home base is in the School of Music. I teach musicology and ethnomusicology, but a lot of the music that I engage with in my teaching is music that comes from around the world and from diverse cultural groups. And so when Joby invited me to become involved with OTC, I was happy to do that because I'm always interested to talk to other people who are researching and teaching in the areas of these diverse art forms. So this is actually an excerpt from the end of the concluding chapter. Of course, U.S. popular culture is not solely the product of encounters between Anglo-Celtic and African-American music and dance. Of course, every immigrant community has added to our expressive arts. But just as the life and music of William Sidney Mount provide an unusually clear snapshot of the particular moment through which colliding cultural groups created one new art form, so the geographic, demographic, ethnic, and musical roots of minstrelsy provide an unusually early, clear, and detailed example of the processes of cross-cultural encounter and synthesis by which American popular culture has always been defined. Minstrelsy, like ragtime, blues, jazz, R&B, hip-hop, polka, soul, gospel, norteño, tejano, Appalachian country, go-go, house, rock and roll, funk, and so many more American popular music styles could only have happened here, on this continent, as a direct, intimate result of our complicated, painful, extraordinary colonial history. It's through these musics and their imitation, exchange, contamination, appropriation, and sheer human vitality, their vision of what a fantastic monument to all the best instincts of the human race this country could be, that we Americans have imagined and invented who we are and what we hope and aspire to become. I'm really looking forward to this reading and Q&A session with Texas Tech students, because I think of my job as a professor of music history to be one about communication. And yes, I communicate with my scholarly peers through the medium of books and articles, and I communicate with students in the classes that I'm assigned to teach. But I also think if it being part of my job to open these topics outward and make them available to everyone and to people across the campus. And as I said, I think these are topics that are still very much part of our popular culture. I'm talking about a historical period, but I think there are resonances of these cycles that recur. And I really look forward to the reading and the Q&A because I think we'll have a great, very engaging discussion, and I hope to see lots of students there.